so far so good. So we need to make use of, or I guess the next thing we need to do, I should say, is to instantiate that hitbox when the player presses the attack key, and instantiate the hitbox in the right location so that it's in roughly the same place as the sword. We need to instantiate it at the proper time. We need to kill it when the animation is finished playing. And we need to make the hitbox positioned correctly if the player is facing left, right, up, or down. So we can do all of that information set up here in the attack state. Well, as I said, one thing we want to do is we want it to work so that when the animation hits a certain frame, we want to create a hitbox. And when an animation hits another frame, the last frame basically, we want to destroy the hitbox. Now, in our platformer and in other assignments in class, when we've wanted to destroy some object based on it reaching the end of its animation, we used an event called animation end, right? But here, we don't want to put it in an animation end event. We want to put it in the attack state. So how are we going to do that? Well, thankfully, there is already a built-in, or rather I should say a custom function. Along with all of these moving functions, there's a custom function that we can use to determine when a sprite is displaying a specific frame. And it's called SpriteKitFrame. So let me open that up real quick. We are going to pass it a frame that we want to check. So like say we want to check if it's hit frame 1. Then we're going to detect how quickly the game is playing and save that in a local variable called speed. And then we're going to use that information, couple it with a little bit of math and some logic in order to return true or false if we have hit the frame that we asked this script to check. Okay? That's the world's quickest definition for something that I mostly just want you to be able to use. So here's the idea. If I look at my player, and let's come down and check the attack right sprite. Here in the attack right sprite, if you look at the first frame, he's just holding the sword. The second, he's starting to swing. The third, he's got a backswing. The fourth, he's still doing a backswing. And it's not until we get out to here, frames 5 and 6, that he's actually swinging the sword, right? Okay. So one approach would be to say that we don't want to instantiate a hitbox until we reach this 5th frame. Now, in reality, that makes for a very short period of time that the hitbox lives. And so even though visually it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to instantiate a hitbox here, I put it here, just because it gives us a little more time for the hitbox to exist. And this is playing so quickly, 15 frames per second, that the player is not going to notice. It's not going to notice that they are able to destroy something even though the sword's not out, because it happens so fast. Okay? Alright, so we can make use of, if we come back to our player and back to our attack state event, the following. I'm going to say if, let's see, sprite, hit frame, and I want to check if it's hit frame 1, then I want to instantiate a hitbox when it hits frame 1. And I need to figure out where to put the hitbox depending on which direction the player is facing and how to angle the hitbox And I want to set up some other variables for use with this hitbox. So let's set up some local variables. Var angle equals direction facing. Remember that one? We used a function that was like get direction facing, and it allows us to get a 0, 1, 2, or 3 depending on which direction the player is facing, and we can take that and we're going to multiply by 90. So if they're facing right, that will be 0. If they're facing up, it'll be 90. Left, 180, and down, it'll be, what, 270. Okay, that's going to be the angle that we want to display our hitbox. Another local variable we're going to call life equals 3. We'll just instantiate it for 3. Well, I'll tell you what this is in just a second. All right. Then damage. This is how much damage is one swipe of, or one collision of this hitbox going to cause to the thing that it hits. Then we're going to have one called knockback. And I'm going to set to 8, and that is basically the force with which we want the thing that we hit to move. Right? So the higher this number, the more you'll see like the enemy flying off in the other direction. Okay? And then finally we want to instantiate a hitbox. And to do this, we're going to use yet another... Oh, I wonder if I've made it yet. We're going to use another custom method, custom function, custom script that I'm realizing as I do it I haven't actually created yet. So we better create that one. Oh, I'm surprised. I thought I might have given you this one. Well, that's not very friendly of me. So let's take a look here at a custom script that we're going to call in order to create the hitbox that we need. Similar to all of the moving scripts that I gave you in the starter project, the custom script, the custom function we're going to generate for this create hitbox is one that I want you to understand how it works, but you don't necessarily need to have a super deep understanding of it. So let me show you how it works. Hold on a second. I'm going to rename it. Create hitbox. And I'm going to paste in the code for it and then talk through it. All right, because there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in here. All right, in this create hitbox script, we need to pass the script a whole bunch of information about how we want the hitbox to look, meaning which sprite do we want it to use, where we want it to be positioned on the X and the Y, what's the image angle that we want to set between 0 and 360, and it's either going to be 0, 90, 180, or 270. Let's see, for frames, this is going to determine how long the hitbox exists. Target array is going to say which objects are we going to check to see if the hitbox collides. Damage is how much damage a swipe of the hitbox is going to cause in a collision, and knockback again is the amount of strength that we want the hitbox to impart on the object that it hits in order to make the other object go flying off in some direction. So this is all the information that we're going to pass into this script. We're going to take all that information that we pass in, which is argument 0 through argument 7, and we're going to store it in similarly named local variables here inside the create hitbox script. So sprite XY, angle frames array, damage, and knockback. Then we will actually create an instance of the hitbox at long last, storing a reference to the hitbox instance that we create in this local variable called hitbox. Okay, this should look familiar. We've done this a whole bunch of times. We're just going to create an instance of a hitbox at whatever x and y coordinates we passed into the script on the player layer in the room, and we're going to create an instance of the hitbox object that we just created a minute ago, right? Okay. Then we're going to talk to that instance. We did this in the platformer to set up some variables on the specific instance of the hitbox. We're going to tell it which sprite we want to show. We were going to tell it what we want the image angle to be, depending on which direction the player is facing. We're going to set the alarm on the hitbox. Remember, we created an alarm on that hitbox, but we didn't do anything with it. And the length of time that the alarm will exist is equal to the value that we pass in on frames. Targets is going to be whichever objects it is we want that hitbox to detect. Damage is how much damage we want it to cause, and knockback is how much power we want to impart. So we see a kind of repeat, right? We call the script and we say, hey, create a hitbox in this place at this angle for this length of time that checks against these things, that causes this much damage, and that produces this much power against the other object. Do all that. And then this script says, fine, I'll store all that information, and then I'll create a hitbox, and on that hitbox, I'll basically pass all this information along to that hitbox. Okay? And then at the very end of the script, we're going to return the ID number of the specific hitbox that we create. All right. Woo. So now that we've seen that, we never have to get into it again. We can just make use of the method. So we're now going to create a hitbox. And if I look down below, you can see, because I used that @arg, I can now see all the stuff that's supposed to go in there, which is very nice. So what is it we want to go in there when we create our hitbox? Well, here's what we're going to create. We're going to create a hitbox. First, we need to know which sprite do we want to show. The sprite we want to show is going to be sword hitbox. That's the crescent moon looking sprite, because we're swiping the sword, right? We want it to be positioned right where we are, so X and Y is where it's going to go. Then we want the angle to be whatever the value of our local angle variable is, which is the direction facing times 90. So it's going to be 0, 90, 180, or 270. Then we want the number of frames to be whatever we set in life. So it's going to be life. It's going to be 3 in this case. 3 frames it will live for. Then what is it we want to check if we're hitting? We want to check enemy parent. Have we created enemy parent? Oh my gosh, so many things we haven't done yet. Enemy parent and grass. Let's just start with the grass since we don't have an enemy yet. Grass. And then the damage amount we want to cause is whatever we've just stored in our local damage variable, which was 1. And the knockback amount is whatever we stored in the local variable here called knockback, which was 8. Whew. Okay, so that will create our hitbox. Then, once we create that, now we want to position the hitbox appropriately depending on which direction we're facing. So we're going to use a switch statement. And we're going to check direction facing. And I don't know if we've used switch statements yet or not, but a switch statement is a different way of doing an if. It's a little easier, where you can check a collection of different values for a variable and then perform actions depending on the value of that variable. Okay? So we want to check the value of direction facing, which you remember is going to be 0, 1, 2, or 3. So we're going to say case dir.up. And you say, wait, what? dir.up? Well, that's another way of saying 1, right? Case dir.up, and then I use this colon. This is a special kind of syntax for a switch statement. We're going to say, oh, let's make this cleaner, shall we? Let's put another little curly brace in here, and we're going to say hitbox dot y minus equals 4. So we're going to move the hitbox up a little bit on the screen. And then we need to say break. And break will just cause us to exit out of this switch statement and not do anything else. Okay? Otherwise, it's almost like we're having an else. Otherwise, what? Otherwise, we're going to do something else. Otherwise, we will set the hitbox.y minus equals 8. Break. Okay. Well, and that will do is if the player is facing up, we want to move the hitbox object up a little bit. Otherwise, we want to move it down a little bit. Okay? That's it. This is so simple we could have just used an if statement, I suppose, but we'll just stick with this just to show you how you can use a switch statement. Okay? Then, still inside this big giant if, right, we'll add another. Is that right? Are we still in that same if? Oh no, we're actually going to exit out. So that's all we need to do in there. Then at the very end, we want to say if sprite hit frame, and we want the last frame basically. Image number. This will return how many frames there are minus 1. That will give us the last frame. Then what are we going to do? We're going to set the state equal to player.move. So what does that mean? We only want the hitbox to live for the length of the time it takes for the animation to play from whatever frame we start checking to the end of it. Okay, and we're going to take care of that by checking the value of that alarm 0. Remember, right? Okay. And using this life. So this will basically set the alarm 0 to be 3, which is almost instantaneous. Then, after we've created the hitbox and we've set all those things up and we've positioned the hitbox appropriately, and we reach the last frame of the animation of the sword swinging left, right, up, or down, then we want to return to the move state. All right, my goodness, that was a whole bunch of work. Let's see what this looks like and see how many errors we've made. All right, here's our player. If I press the X key, what you'll see, because I haven't turned off the visibility, you can see that we have that crescent-looking hitbox appearing. Now if I turn left, it appears off to our left. I turn up, turns up there, down, goes down there. Now, positioning of these is not perfect. I might play around a little bit with the positioning, and in fact you could use that switch statement to more accurately reposition the hitbox. You might want it to move a little farther up if it's facing up. Maybe you want it to move a little farther to the right or to the left, depending on which direction it's facing, and so on. But it is all working. Now, right now, it doesn't actually do anything other than exist. It doesn't have any impact, and we'll focus on getting it to actually damage the grass in our next video.